Chapter 1. The rehearsal that replaced me. They thought they could replace me before the wedding. I watched another woman walk my aisle, hold my bouquet, speak my vows. What they didn't know was that my name was on every contract, every deposit, every dollar they touched. When they erased me in public, I wrote them back in legal ink. My name wasn't decoration, it was ownership. And when the curtain fell, the only thing that vanished was their illusion. I arrived at the Beacon Grand in Boston with the hopeful exhaustion of someone who has spent a year building a house and has come to touch the finished walls. The lobby smelled like polished wood and peonies, the kind of scent that announces old money and perfect manners. A quartet rehearsed in the mezzanine's soft strings, rising and falling as if every note had been ironed flat. I smoothed the skirt of my cream dress and told myself to breathe. Rehearsal dinners are dress rehearsals, nothing more. You walk through the scene, you thank the people who helped you save your tears for morning sunlight. The ballroom doors were propped open, and I could see the chandelier glittering as if the room were holding its breath. People I knew in halves and thirds clustered at round tables. His aunt from Providence. His college friends who always hugged me a little too hard. My name cards lay at the place settings with neat calligraphy that had taken a woman in Seattle 3 hours to perfect. I stepped inside and the air shifted. Not an obvious shift, more like a current tugging at your ankles when you wade into water that looks still. Kelsey Hart stood near the floral arch with a clipboard and a perfectly kept blowout, conferring with a planner I had hired 6 months earlier. She wore a pale silk dress that managed to be respectful and radiant, at once the kind of dress people pick for engagement photos when they want to look like a promise. Beside her, Eleanor Whitaker oversaw the color of the roses, as if she were choosing wallpaper for a house that had been in her family for a century. Kelsey lifted her wrist to test how the bracelet caught light. Eleanor touched a ribbon and called for a warmer ivory. It was the kind of choreography that tells you the scene was rehearsed before you arrived. Grant stood a few feet away, hands in his pockets. Body turned toward them, eyes sliding past me with an apology he did not elevate into words. I felt it like a draft through a closed window. The planner glanced up, startled to see me, then turned toward Kelsey again and said something about timing the entrance. She pivoted toward a staffer and asked to dim the uplights. I watched her give my cues with a confidence that did not belong to her and yet somehow fit the room. The planner called out a title with cheerful efficiency that flattened my name and inflated hers. Mrs. Whitaker to be Would You Try the Aisle Pacing One More Time? The words hovered between us like confetti that refused to fall. A few heads turned, a few smiles froze. I felt a flicker of heat rise in my chest, the old response to a public wrong. I caught it with both hands and pressed it down. I said, "It is fine, she is only running lines." People around me exhaled, grateful for the relief of politeness and the extension of their own denial. No one seemed to hear the second sentence inside my voice. She is only an actress, and the stage is rented in my name. I walked the perimeter of the room like a surveyor. Everything that had consumed my calendar was here. The monogram on the menu card that matched the wax seal on the welcome letters. The champagne flutes I had sourced from a small company in Vermont after the first vendor fell through. The quartet playing the song I picked for the processional in a key that made it sound like hope. It would have been beautiful from the center of the room. From the edge, it looked like a painting hung slightly crooked. Kelsey took her place at the top of the aisle with the bouquet I had chosen from a mood board labeled Winter Light. She breathed in and out and began a slow walk beneath the crystal chandelier. Eleanor touched Grant's arm with a proud little smile that told me I had mistaken the genre of our story. It had never been a romance. It was always about lineage and placement and a good marriage that reads well on paper. Kelsey reached the last row of chairs and turned toward the arch while the quartet lifted the phrase that would have carried me toward a promise. I stepped forward just enough to see her face clearly and the delicate tremor in her smile. I said in a voice that did not rise or break that tradition really is perfect when everyone understands who is acting and who is watching. The planner pretended not to hear. Eleanor did not turn. Grant did not move. The quartet slid into the next bar as if a string had not just snapped. I found a glass of water because I needed something to hold. A server stopped beside me with a tray of champagne, and I took one and practiced the art of appearing included. Kelsey and Eleanor compared ribbon swatches again. The planner adjusted the arch and asked for a warmer wash on the uplights. I could feel the staff deciding in real time where power lived. It did not live with the woman who signed the checks. It lived with the woman who was endorsed by the family. Dinner gathered itself as dinners do when everyone wants to sit and be told what to do. The seating chart placed me at Grant's right and Eleanor's left. Kelsey sat across from me with that effortless laughter that makes people around her feel like they are doing better than they are. Conversations skimmed along the surface of socially acceptable topics while small undercurrents tugged at knees and ankles. The fillet was perfect. The salad was a study in restraint. The speeches were short and safe. A friend of his told a story designed to make me seem driven in a charming way. Eleanor lifted her glass and said how grateful they were for a woman who paid attention to details. Kelsey smiled as if the praise were meant for her. I kept pace with the performance because a performance completed is a record that can be referenced later. When it was my turn to say something, I thanked the staff by name and the planner for her work, and the quartet for changing the key last minute. I nodded at Grant and said we built this year with lists and emails and 100 small choices, and that the thing I loved most about him was how he made room for what mattered to me. The lie tasted like aspirin on my tongue and went down the same way. Inside my head, the metronome that runs my professional life began to click. Vendor list, payment schedule, signatory lines, cancellation clauses. The choreography on paper matters more than the choreography under a chandelier. I felt the strength back in my spine, the familiar one you develop when your job is to keep events from falling apart, while a client insists everything is fine. Eleanor talked about Whitaker family gatherings on the Cape, and the way sea air makes everything taste like a memory. She mentioned how seamless the past weeks had felt with Kelsey taking on some of the design decisions, and how grateful she was to find someone who understood their family's aesthetic. The table hummed in agreement. I swallowed champagne that had gone flat. Grant did not meet my eyes. He cut his steak and commented on the tannins in the wine as if anyone cared. Kelsey laughed when someone told a story about college. The planner circulated with a checklist and a pen. I watched that pen like a hawk watches a field. Whoever holds the checklist holds the version of reality that gets implemented. When dessert arrived, I excused myself. In the hallway, the hotel carpet muted every step like a secret. I stood by a window that looked over the city and let the cold make my breath visible. I told myself two truths at once. I am not a woman who fights for a place at a table that is already set against her. I am not a woman who leaves without a record of what was done in her name. I went back in and stayed through coffee. I laughed on cue. I thanked people for flying in. I hugged a cousin of his I barely knew and listened to her talk about a new house in Newton and how hard it was to find a contractor who still took pride in work. The quartet packed up. The staff cleared plates with the diplomacy of people who witness more true stories in fancy rooms than most of us can imagine. The night folded itself into applause and people drifted toward elevators. Upstairs, my room smelled like hotel linen and new carpet and something faintly metallic that might have been the inside of an air vent. I placed my clutch on the desk and set my phone beside it, and then stood still for a long time. The muscles in my jaw told me I had been clenching my teeth for hours. I took off my heels and felt the relief move through my body in a way that made me want to sit on the floor. I did not. I reached for the ring. The diamond had been chosen after 3 appointments and 2 resettings because I wanted it to look like light caught in water. I rotated it between my fingers and then slid it off. The indent on my skin stayed for a moment a pale echo of a promise. I placed the ring on the desk on a folded hotel notepad and breathed until my heartbeat slowed into something readable. I called Dana Pierce in Chicago. She and I had shared cheap coffee and colder libraries in grad school and had once sat on a fire escape at 2 a.m. making vows to ourselves that no man would ever be allowed to make us small. The call rang and she answered on the second ring, the old warmth in her voice rising through the distance. I told her I needed counsel. I told her what I had seen. I told her what had been said and not said. She did not fill the spaces with pity. She asked what I controlled. I said I controlled the contracts, the deposits, the vendor list, the file tree named Beacon Grand that lived on my laptop and in the cloud. I said I controlled my name on every line where the person who pays is required to write the name that matches the account. Dana's voice flattened into the tone that closes a door and opens a file. She told me to document what I could remember while it was fresh and to forward any email traffic that hinted at substitution or reassignment. She asked me to send the master vendor list and copies of invoices and any text summary from the planner. She said we can talk about remedies in the morning, but tonight we create a record. She told me to drink water and set an alarm and to write down the sentences I wish I could say in a room where people pretend not to hear. I opened my laptop and the familiar desktop lit the room with a blue that felt like oxygen. I pulled up the folder where every receipt sat in chronological order. I verified the signatory lines. I confirmed the cancellation clauses that required written consent from the contracting party. I took screenshots that included date and timestamps. I forwarded them to Dana and CC'd a private address I use when I do not want anything to be lost inside a single ecosystem. I then wrote a list by hand because paper is its own kind of witness. I wrote the misnomer in the ballroom. I wrote the planner's call for Kelsey to practice the aisle. I wrote the sentence Eleanor spoke about finding someone who understands their aesthetic and how the table responded like a choir. I wrote the sensation in my body when Grant looked everywhere but at me. I wrote the exact color of the uplights because details are anchors. The room was quiet in that particular hotel way where the building itself seems to be listening. I stood and crossed to the mirror over the dresser. The lights set into the frame cast a soft glow that forgives almost everything except the truth in your own eyes. I looked at the woman in the glass. Her hair was still pinned perfectly, her dress still fit. The careful makeup still did what it was supposed to do. The only change was in the set of her shoulders. I recognized myself like you recognize a city by its skyline after you have lived there long enough to know what blocks the view. On the desk, the ring caught the lamplight and threw it back in a thin line across the wood. I watched that line until the angle changed and it disappeared. I thought about how some endings are not explosions. Some endings are a quiet closing of a folder and the opening of another. I thought about stages and audiences and how a performance can be flawless and still be false. I turned off the lamp and left the ring where it lay. In the dark, the city hummed through the windows and distant car horns stitched themselves into a kind of lullaby. I lay down with my phone on the pillow. The Notes app opened, the cursor blinking like a patient heartbeat. I typed the first sentence of the record that would become the spine of what comes next. The night they tried to replace me at my own rehearsal, I decided to stop playing a part and start reading the contract. I closed my eyes and let the room settle. Morning would ask for actions I already knew how to take. Tonight only asked that I tell the truth to myself and write it down. If this story touched you, please subscribe and let someone out there feel less alone. Thank you. Chapter 2. The Bride on Paper. I woke before my alarm with the kind of alertness that comes when your mind has already begun without you. The window was blue with early Boston light. I showered, braided my hair into something that would not ask for attention, and packed with the neat speed of someone who has left hotels at too many dawns. The ring stayed on the desk. I put the hotel notepad with last night's list in my bag. At checkout, the clerk asked if everything had been satisfactory. I said yes and thought about how that word covers so much ground when you do not plan to return. Logan was a choreography of rolling suitcases and red eyes that matched the name of the flight I booked at the gate. I stared at a map of the country and felt the thin thread of a flight path pulling me west. On the plane, I opened my laptop and turned on airplane mode like a boundary. I checked the folder for Beacon Grand again, the one with layers that mirrored the year I had just spent. The vendor list, the retainer receipts, the master contract with my name spelled correctly at the top. I did not annotate anything. I only let my eyes memorize. We landed in Seattle to a sky the color of slate and a fine mist that rinsed the airport sidewalks. My car was where I left it. My office sits above a bakery that starts proofing dough at 4 a.m, so the hallway always smells faintly like a promise. I unlocked the glass door and turned on the desk lamp even though it was day. The small tends to big when the intention inside it is sharp. I opened the drive that holds Langford Events Consulting and located the contracts for the wedding. There is a pleasure in verification that has nothing to do with gloating. The header read, Contracting Party Ava Langford. The signatory lines read, Authorized Signature Ava Langford. The ACH instructions linked to my business account. The cancellation clause required written consent from the contracting party for any material changes. The planner agreement referenced a scope of work approved by me. The florist invoice bore my initials. The string quartet had an addendum filed 3 weeks ago that I had approved when they requested a rehearsal fee. I took screenshots that captured the whole page and the timestamp and the document path. The phone vibrated on my desk. The caller ID read Beacon Grand. I answered and heard the measured voice I remembered from the site visit in August. This is Julia Grant. Before she said anything else, she apologized because she had learned long ago that apologies lower heart rates. She said there had been a request from the groom's side to transfer the contract to a different name. She used the name as if she were trying not to give offense. I do not need an apology, I said. I need the email that contains the request and any attachments. She paused, then said she could forward the request if, and only if, she received a written instruction from the contracting party, which in this case is you. Please send me the instruction in an email from the address on file, and I will reply with the requested documentation. Her tone was neat and ethical. It sounded like a hallway where the lights are all working. I typed the instruction while we were still on the phone and pressed send. 2 minutes later, my inbox chimed with a forward that included a chain of messages. The first was from the planner to a Whitaker family assistant. The next was from the assistant to the venue accounts team. The last was a short message asking the venue to reissue the invoice and all vendor references to Kelsey Hart as the bride of record. No explanation, no contract attachment, no legal authority. I saved a PDF of the chain and sent it to myself at a second address and to a third that lives on a server in another state. Then I created a folder named Reassignment Attempts and filed it with a name that began with the date so that it could be sorted by time. I called Dana in Chicago. She answered with a voice that had lines like a well-written brief. I summarized the forward from the venue. She asked if the venue had acted on the request. I said no. She said that was good and confirmed we were dealing with a request rather than a completed change. She told me to forward the emails and contracts and any text messages from the planner that could establish a pattern. I selected everything the way you select a whole field with one click and sent it. She said she would start building a file that would be ready for court if court became the only classroom where these people learned. She told me to take a breath and then to log into any joint accounts I shared with Grant or his family, because requests like the one Julia forwarded do not travel alone. I logged into the investment platform where the Wedding Liquidity Fund sat inside a folder labeled Future that we created last year when we thought we were building the same life. The page loaded, and for a moment, I did not understand the numbers. Then the figures resolved into a subtraction so large it felt like a cold hand on the back of my neck. $150,000 had been withdrawn 2 days before the rehearsal from the fund, with a memo line that read vendor float. The withdrawal had been executed by an authorized user. The only authorized users were Grant and me. I scrolled to the authorization audit and saw that the approval had used his credentials from an IP address in Massachusetts. I took 3 screenshots, full page with the account number redacted for anyone who did not need it. Transaction detail with the memo line, authorization log with the IP. I printed to PDF and named the files with the date and year, month, day order so there would never be a question of sequence. I forwarded the files to Dana and included the login audit as a separate attachment. My phone rang while the progress bars were still moving. Grant's face filled the screen. The light in whatever room he was in made him look younger and more tired. He said his mother only wanted the best for us and had asked him to take care of a few things so that I would not be stressed and that I was taking things personally when they were only trying to make sure the day was as elegant as it deserved to be. He said all of this like he was reading from a card. The script tasted like money and control. I kept my voice level and my sentences short. I said there was a request to transfer the contract and that the venue had not acted on it because they understand the law and their own paperwork. I said I had reviewed the investment account and that a large withdrawal had been made for a purpose that did not match any invoice schedule and that the authorization used his credentials. He said it was temporary and that he had spoken to his father and that the plan was to cover any gaps after the wedding gifts posted. He said gifts like a person who had never worked a service job in December. I said we would not be relying on hypothetical generosity to correct an act that never should have occurred. I said we would be following best practice. He said you are making a scene. I said I am making a record. He shifted the camera so that I could see a portion of a mirror and a cufflink and what looked like the corner of his mother's voice. He said his mother had set up a meeting with the planner to finalize the processional and that the family felt it would be better if Kelsey took on more of the front-facing elements, since she had a calming effect on the room. He said this as if he were talking about flowers. I said, if your mother needs a lesson in best practice, I will teach her one. It begins with reading what you sign before you try to move a name that is not yours. He exhaled and said I was being dramatic. I said drama is what people reach for when they cannot distinguish between a boundary and a betrayal. He started to say my name in the soft way he used when we were still on the same side of something. I ended the call before he could finish the sentence. The screen went black and reflected my face back at me. The reflection looked steady and a little older than yesterday. The phone rang again. The caller ID displayed the Whitaker house line. I answered. Eleanor's voice had the brightness of a woman who has never had to raise her voice to get what she wanted. She said I was creating unnecessary friction, and that in their family they prefer to handle things with discretion and grace, and that she hoped I would reconsider whatever measures I was thinking of taking, because we were so close to a beautiful weekend. I said discretion without consent is just secrecy, and that grace without accountability is just theater. She said she was concerned about my mental state, and that everyone had noticed how tightly I held to details, and that perhaps this was not the right season for such a significant step if I could not relax. I said if stability means being quiet while other people erase me, then I will take the accusation of instability as a compliment. She paused long enough for me to imagine her recalibrating. She said she was sure we could find a compromise, and that Kelsey could step into a more official role while I took some time to rest, and that later people would only remember how lovely everything looked. I said later people would remember the lawsuit if they insisted on moving forward with fraud and impersonation. The line went very still. She said there was no need for threats. I said there was only a need for the truth on paper. Then I thanked her for calling and ended the conversation. I took a breath and another, and then opened my email to draft a notice to the venue and the planner. I wrote that the contracting party hereby instructs a hold on any change requests not originating from or explicitly authorized in writing by the contracting party, and that any communication suggesting reassignment should be forwarded to council. I BCC'd Dana. I sent the message and waited for the delivery confirmation. It arrived 8 seconds later. Dana called. Her voice sounded like a hallway with a guard at the end. She said the withdrawal from the fund changed the field, and that we would be filing a notice to the financial institution to preserve records and to freeze further movement pending review. She said we would include a statement that funds had been diverted without consent for a purpose unrelated to any approved budget. She said we would use terms like conversion and unjust enrichment and misrepresentation, and that if the family wished to resolve the matter, they could direct their questions to her office. She asked if I had the original partnership documents for the fund. I did. I scanned the signature pages and sent them while we spoke. I looked at the clock. It was past noon and I had not eaten. I walked downstairs and bought a coffee and a croissant, and brought them back up and took 2 bites and realized I was not yet someone who could chew while adrenaline was choosing where to live. I put the plate aside and opened the metal filing cabinet that holds what I do not trust to live only in pixels. The top drawer is labeled Callahan, and inside it my handwriting has divided the year into months with tabbed folders. I slid out the March folder, and then the June folder, and then the September folder. I placed them on the desk and began to review so that my body would remember that I had done the work. Near the back of September, a letter on thick paper bore the embossed logo of Callahan and Company. I had kept it because there is a power in the original. It was the acknowledgement of my investment from the summer with a note that thanked me for believing in family ventures. The second page was a standard authorization form that placed my name beside the title of contributing partner for the specific fund we had created for wedding and related expenses. The signature line at the bottom carried the curve of my hand. In the corner, the words "Authorized by A. Langford" were stamped in small, careful letters by an accounts clerk who probably did not remember that Tuesday. I uncapped a red pen and drew a thin circle around those words, because sometimes your body needs to see what your mind already knows. The circle bled a tiny halo where the paper drank the ink. I sat back and let my shoulders drop. Outside the window, the Seattle sky had not chosen a color. The bakery ovens kicked on below, and the scent rose through the floor like a reminder that heat and pressure are what makes small things rise. My phone buzzed with a new email from Julia confirming receipt of my instruction and affirming that the venue would not process any changes absent written authorization from me. She attached the contract again and the schedule of vendor access for the weekend and said the staff would await further direction. Professional, simple, clean. I forwarded her email to Dana for the file and sent a brief thank you that acknowledged how rare it is to encounter someone who does their job with a spine. I stood at the window and held the paper with my circled name to the light. I thought about how people like to move names around as if names were furniture and rooms belonged to them. If they enjoy that game, they can play it without me. I will show them which signature holds weight. If this story touched you, please subscribe and let someone out there feel less alone. Thank you. Chapter 3: The Wedding That Vanished. The call from Julia came in the late afternoon, her voice steady in my ear like a level line. She said the schedule for the weekend remained unchanged, that the service timeline matched the last version of the plan, and that the only difference noted by the assistant on the groom's side was the name of the bride. She did not embellish. She did not hint. She gave me the fact and waited. Thank you, Julia, I said. Keep every document exactly where it is. I will be there in the morning. I packed a single garment bag and a briefcase. I chose the cream suit that makes people lower their voices. I picked a silk blouse with a collar that sits like a decision. I placed copies of the contracts in a leather folder and slid a second set into the outer sleeve of my bag. I booked the last flight east and slept with my mouth open like a person who has laid down a burden long enough to recover the strength to lift it again. Dawn in Boston had that pale metallic light that makes even the pavement look clean. I took a car from the airport and watched the city pass in a series of steady frames. Brownstones, a bakery opening its doors, a runner in a hat that made sense in this temperature and in this town. The Beacon Grand rose out of the block with the kind of confidence that comes from never having been told no. I stepped out and smelled the cold before the revolving door let me inside. The lobby was quieter than it had been 2 nights ago. The quartet would not arrive until the afternoon. Staff moved with the practiced grace of people who understand how to keep a day on time. I walked to the front desk and asked for Julia. The concierge called and then nodded toward a hallway that led to the offices behind the ballrooms. Julia met me at the threshold with a folder in her hands. She had the calm eyes of someone who has chosen professional clarity as a way of life. She said my instruction had been logged and that the account remained under my name as contracting party. She had printed the latest correspondence and clipped it to the top of the contract packet. She asked if I needed anything else from her at this moment. I will ask you to witness anything that requires a witness, I said. For now, I need to see the room. She walked me through the service corridor and pushed open a set of double doors that led us into the main ballroom. The uplights were still set to the warmer ivory. The arch stood where we had placed it on paper months ago. A photographer tested angles with an assistant pointing at the aisle as if measurements could erase the center of gravity. Near the far wall, Kelsey stood in a gown the color of the inside of seashells, while a stylist pinned fabric at her hip. She lifted her chin toward the light, and the photographer nodded. A white robe lay folded on a chair like a placeholder for a person who had been invited and then uninvited without a word. Eleanor stood with the planner and 2 other women from her circle, the kind who wear good wool in the morning and make an entrance without ever speeding up. She spoke in a tone that did not require volume to carry. When she saw me, she paused for half a second, then smiled with a politeness that had edges. I walked the aisle without breaking stride. The sound of my heels on the parquet floor was the only sound that marked time. The photographer lowered his camera. The stylist stepped back from Kelsey. The planner tried to arrange her face into something that looked like neutrality. Eleanor leaned toward the planner and spoke as if making an observation about linens. Kelsey is the presence we needed. I turned my head just enough to let the sentence land where it was aimed. If that is true, I said, I will be glad to let the court confirm who is needed and in what capacity. Grant appeared from a side door like a man who has been told he should have been here already. He wore a jacket without a tie and the careful look of a person preparing to explain what should not have happened. He said my name with a softness that aimed at erasing the past 2 days. I watched his mouth shape the syllables and felt nothing give way. Kelsey took a breath and stepped toward me with her hands open and her face arranged in consolation. Ava, she said, this is a misunderstanding. We wanted to make sure things did not overwhelm you. I was only helping steady the process. I looked at Julia. She had stationed herself at the side of the room with her folder and a pen. I nodded once. She stepped forward. Julia spoke in that same level voice that had carried me across the morning. Per instruction from the contracting party, all services under this event agreement are suspended pending direction from the contracting party. This includes setup vendor access and rehearsal use of the space. The venue will not process requests for reassignment or substitution unless authorized in writing by the contracting party on file. The air changed temperature. People do not expect the room itself to decide. The planner produced a strained smile and said we could all sit down and discuss options and that surely no one wanted to derail a beautiful weekend. Grant said this was unnecessary and that the paperwork was only a formality and that the family had already moved funds to ensure the day would be covered. I watched his eyes when he said the word funds, and it was like watching a man walk on ice that has cracked, but not yet admitted water. I turned slightly toward him. You moved $150,000 out of a fund, with my name on the authorization, I said. You did it without my consent. You did it with a memo line that does not match any approved schedule or invoice sequence. You have turned a weekend into evidence. He opened his hands as if to catch a fall. It was temporary. We were going to return it. The gifts will cover the difference. Dad said we should not bother you with the logistics of a few vendor payments. Do not mistake my absence for consent, I said. And do not mistake gifts for a ledger. I lifted my folder and held it without opening it. This is contract reconciliation. We are not discussing taste. We are confirming authority. Kelsey tried again, her voice pitched to a note she had used in other rooms to calm other conflicts. Ava, please. I do not want this for you. I can step back if that helps. Eleanor only wanted the day to look like the family. She asked me to help carry some of the details. You have been so strong for so long. I looked at her and felt a sort of quiet pity for a person who thinks usefulness is the same as belonging. This is not about stepping back or forward, I said. This is about whose name is on the line where responsibility lives. Eleanor's smile stayed exactly where it had been when I came in. We have always managed our family events with discretion, she said. No one needs the spectacle you seem intent on creating. We can resolve this if you will take a breath and think about the greater picture. The greater picture, I said, is a document with my name on it, a bank record that shows an unauthorized movement of funds, and a venue that understands the meaning of consent. The picture is not a spectacle. It is a record. Grant's voice lost its scripted ease. Do not do this, he said. You will regret it. People will talk. You will make yourself look bitter. I studied his face and remembered the single night I had thought we were building the same house. I will risk being mistaken for bitter, I said. I will not risk being mistaken about who I am. Julia looked at me. I nodded. She turned to the staff and spoke with clarity that left no room for theater. All setup activities are paused. Vendors who are currently on site will wait in designated holding areas. No further decorative or logistical work will proceed until written direction is received from the contracting party. The photographer lowered his camera to his side and stared at his shoes. The stylist folded a pin back into a silver tin. The planner went pale beneath her foundation and whispered into her headset. A waiter pushing a rack of water glasses stopped behind a column and waited for a cue that did not come. The sound in the room changed from the clatter of preparation to the soft hum of a building that has remembered its original purpose. Grant stepped toward me like he might close the distance by standing nearer. Ava, do not take this from me, he said. You do not have to do it this way. You took from me, I said. You took my name off a request that could never have been granted, and my money out of a fund that was built on trust. The way is set by what you already did. Kelsey's hands trembled and she looked at Eleanor for instruction. Eleanor did not move her lips. The instruction was the absence of instruction. It felt like a wall. Julia approached me with the folder. I have copies of the executed contract, all addenda, and the payment ledger, she said. Would you like to review them here or in my office? Here is fine, I said. Everyone in this room participates in the outcome. They can live with the truth. I opened the folder and flipped to the signature page that carried my name and the date. I held it up without flourish. People squinted not because they could read it from where they stood, but because this is how people stare when a narrative they prefer has been replaced by a fact that does not need them. I laid the page on the table and placed beside it the correspondence chain where the assistant had asked for a transfer of the contract to Kelsey. I pointed to the final line of the venue's policy that referenced authorization. I did not raise my voice. The paper did the work. Kelsey whispered my name again, but the plea had gone out of it. I never meant to hurt you, she said. I thought I was helping everyone. Help is not help when it relies on erasing the person who built the thing you want, I said. The planner found a sliver of voice. We can reframe the program, she said. There is still time to save a version of the day. There is not, I said. The day you wanted cannot proceed on a foundation that was not granted. You may pack what you have unpacked. You will be paid for hours worked as per the original agreement. You will not use images from today in any portfolio. Eleanor stepped forward half a pace. You will be very sorry, she said. You are making enemies you cannot afford. I felt a small astonishment at how often people mistake consequence for threat. I will be fine, I said. I built my life on my own work. The only thing I cannot afford is self-betrayal. Grant put his hands on the back of a chair and looked at the floor. He said nothing for a long moment. Then he asked Julia if the room could be held for a meeting later in the day, while the family regrouped. Julia said the space would remain unavailable until the contracting party provided direction. She said it like a door closing without a slam. I gathered the contract pages and slid them back into the folder. I handed Julia a brief note that confirmed suspension of services and authorized vendor release upon invoicing for time already expended. She read it and nodded. The planner sank into a chair and stared at the arch as if it might tell her what to do next. The photographer spoke to his assistant in a low voice about packing the lenses carefully. I turned to Kelsey. I suggest you change out of that gown, I said. It is a costume you were not given. She swallowed and nodded. I am sorry, she said. Not for your sake, maybe. For mine. I did not understand how this would feel. You will, I said. We always learn the lesson we try to teach others. I thanked Julia. She put a hand over the folder in a gesture that looked like a vow. We have you on record, she said. We will comply. I left the ballroom the way I had entered in a straight line that did not advertise itself. In the hallway, a bellman waited with a cart of linens and the patience of someone who has seen things fall apart and come together more times than he can count. I stepped into the lobby where the morning crowd had grown by a few people holding coffee and curiosity. A woman near the elevator looked at her phone, and then at me, and then at her phone again. I did not check my messages until I was outside. The cold told the truth to my lungs. My screen held a cluster of notifications. A local blog had posted a blind item about a society wedding in distress, with a tease about the real bride. Someone had reposted a candid of Kelsey in white with the caption, "Guess who?" A reporter I did not know had emailed a request for comment. I considered them all and put the phone back in my coat. The street smelled like exhaust and winter. Taxis lifted and settled at the curb. Above me, the Beacon Grand glittered on schedule. I walked toward the corner and felt the muscles in my neck unclench by degrees. I thought about the people in that room and how they would tell the story of this morning to themselves. I did not need to be present for their rehearsal of a new narrative. At the crosswalk, I waited with a man in work boots and a woman with a stroller and a kid who kicked his blanket free and laughed at the wind. The light changed and the group moved as one. I looked straight ahead and let the rhythm of the city pull me into its ordinary. I did not need to raise my voice. I did not need to explain anything. I did not need to argue. I only needed the paperwork to speak for me. If this story touched you, please subscribe and let someone out there feel less alone. Thank you. Chapter 4, The Courtroom Vows. 6 weeks later, I sat outside a courtroom in Suffolk County with a leather folder on my lap and the calm that comes when the path is narrow and paved. Dana adjusted a stack of exhibits beside me and glanced at the hallway clock. The janitor had finished with his mop and the marble smelled faintly like lemon. A woman with a press badge waited on a bench across from us, tapping a headline into her phone with the speed of someone who wrote through storms. Her badge said, Hannah Lee. She looked up once, measured me with a reporter's quick kindness, then looked back down. Dana leaned in. Last check. Complaint for fraud and misrepresentation. Conversion of funds from the wedding liquidity account. Unjust enrichment. Breach of contract on the event agreement. You are ready. I am ready. We stood when the clerk opened the door. The room was cool and patient. The judge took the bench with the practiced stillness of someone who has taught this lesson many times. Counsel for the Whitakers sat to the right with Grant and Eleanor and two men in suits who had the particular stillness of corporate counsel. Kelsey sat behind them in a navy dress that tried to be serious. The judge looked down at the docket and then at the tables. Appearances. Dana gave her name and firm and then said mine. Opposing counsel did the same. Grant kept his eyes on the tabletop. Eleanor examined a spot on the sleeve of her jacket as if lint could be a strategy. The judge nodded once. Ms. Pierce, your client's allegations. Dana rose. Plaintiff alleges that defendants engaged in fraud and misrepresentation by attempting to substitute a different bride of record on an executed event contract without the consent of the contracting party. Plaintiff alleges conversion of $150,000 from a joint investment account labeled Wedding Liquidity Fund without her authorization. Plaintiff alleges unjust enrichment by defendants' use of those funds for expenses unrelated to any agreed invoice schedule and for the purchase of personal items. Finally, plaintiff alleges breach of contract arising from efforts to reassign control of the event in violation of the agreement's consent clause. Opposing counsel stood. Defendants deny all allegations and assert that any transfers were temporary and within the ordinary course of preparation. There was no intent to defraud. The family sought only to ensure continuity when the plaintiff became emotionally unstable with respect to planning. We will show that any funds at issue were intended for wedding-related costs and that there is no damage. The judge looked from one table to the other. Facts will be more useful than characterizations. Ms. Pierce, your first witness. Dana called Julia. She walked to the stand with a straight spine and the quiet that has anchored more rooms than mine. She swore in and sat. Dana asked about her position at the Beacon Grand and about the event contract. Julia answered cleanly. She identified the agreement by number and date. She confirmed that the contracting party was me. She described receiving a request from the groom's side to transfer the contract to Kelsey Hart and that the venue did not process the request because the policy requires written authorization from the contracting party on file. She confirmed she received a written instruction from me to hold all changes and that the venue complied. Dana tendered the email chain. The judge glanced at the pages and marked them. Opposing counsel rose. Ms. Grant, would you agree that weddings are dynamic affairs and sometimes the parties make adjustments close to the date? Julia did not change expression. Adjustments are made in writing by the contracting party. We do not substitute contracting parties. No further questions. Dana called me next. I swore in and sat. The wood of the witness chair was smooth from years of hands. Dana approached with the ledger. Ms. Langford, did you open the account referred to as the Wedding Liquidity Fund? Yes, in May of last year. Who were the authorized users? Grant Whitaker and me. Directing your attention to a transaction 2 days before the rehearsal. What do you see? A withdrawal of $150,000 with the memo vendor Float. The authorization log shows Mr. Whitaker's credentials from an IP address in Massachusetts. Did you consent to this transfer? No. Did you authorize any change to the event contract? No. Did you ever instruct the venue to substitute another bride? No. Dana placed 3 pages on the ledge before me. Identify these: full-page account view, transaction detail, authorization log. Move to admit. The judge marked the exhibits. Opposing counsel stood. Ms. Langford, is it not true that wedding gifts were expected to cover any temporary gap? Did you not discuss this with your fiancé? I did not agree to fund a gap created by an unauthorized withdrawal. Is it not true that you are prone to control and that you refused reasonable help? Control looks like consent on paper. Help looks like silence. I chose consent. He tried a smile that did not reach his eyes. No further questions. Dana called Ethan Brooks. He looked like someone who worked with his hands and knew how to hold a line straight. He swore in and sat. Dana asked about his relationship with Kelsey. He said they dated in 2022. She asked if he had provided materials to counsel. He said yes, and that he had discovered emails where Kelsey used my company name to pitch a PR project after we ended a collaboration. He said he brought them because he thought I should know the pattern. Dana tendered the emails. The judge read them like a person who has seen every version of this story. Opposing counsel rose. Mr. Brooks, You are a disgruntled ex. Is that fair? Ethan's mouth twitched. I am a man who dislikes forgery. No further questions. Dana rested. Opposing counsel called Eleanor. She swore in and sat with a smile that had been useful in philanthropy. He asked about the family's intentions. She said the family values grace and continuity, and that they never intended to harm me, and that they only asked Kelsey to assist because the stress had become unhealthy. He asked if the funds were used for wedding costs. She said yes, and that any temporary transfers would have been reconciled. Her voice softened on reconciled, as if the word could replace a check. Dana stood. Mrs. Whitaker, did you authorize or sign any document that permitted you to transfer the event contract to another bride? No. That is not my role. Did you instruct anyone to request such a transfer? I suggested the planner coordinate with our assistant, so you asked for it without signing for it. I asked that the weekend proceed smoothly. Did you know your son withdrew $150,000 from the wedding liquidity fund? I do not manage his accounts. Did you benefit from any personal purchase using those funds? Her mouth thinned. I do not recall any such purchase. Dana placed a small receipt on the ledge. This is a jeweler's receipt in Back Bay for a ring charged to the fund's linked card 3 days before the rehearsal. The customer name field reads G. Whitaker. The shipping address is Ms. Hart's apartment. You do not recall this. Eleanor looked down. She did not answer. No further questions. Grant took the stand with a look that asked the room to forgive him in advance. Opposing counsel guided him through a narrative about intention and misunderstanding. He said the fund was created for the wedding, and he believed he was using it for that purpose, and that he always intended to replenish it after gifts, and that he never meant to hurt me. He said Kelsey was helping the family, and that my reaction was out of proportion. He said the phrase out of proportion as if it could shrink what had been done. Dana stood. Mr. Whitaker, did you withdraw $150,000 from the wedding liquidity fund without Ms. Langford's consent? He stared at the page on the ledge rather than at me. Yes. Did you authorize your assistant to request that the venue substitute Miss Hart as the bride of record? Yes. Did you purchase a ring for Ms. Hart using a card linked to the fund? He closed his eyes for a moment. Yes. Did you tell Miss Langford about any of this before she discovered the withdrawal on her own? No. Dana stepped back. No further questions. The judge leaned slightly forward. Ms. Pierce, anything else? Dana said she would like to submit a preliminary report from a forensic audit of Callahan and Company. She explained that the company's internal records reflected unexplained payments and reimbursements tied to event vendors, and that the total irregularity across 5 years approached $250,000, including the $150,000 drawn from the wedding fund. She emphasized that this was a preliminary number pending full discovery. The judge took the report, read the executive summary, and then turned a page as if turning a thought. Opposing counsel objected on grounds of relevance. The judge overruled and said patterns matter when intent is at issue. He looked at me. Ms. Langford, do you have anything to add? I kept my hands folded. I entered into an agreement in good faith. I funded a joint account for a shared purpose. My name was used without consent to move money, and my role was erased on paper in a way that would have made that erasure real if the venue had not followed its policy. I am not here because of taste or hurt feelings. I am here because consent matters, and because a contract is the only way to keep a promise honorable when love is not. The judge nodded slowly. He took a moment that belonged to the bench and then spoke. This will proceed. The court finds sufficient basis to issue an order preserving the status of the event agreement and enjoining any reassignment absent written consent from the contracting party. The court further orders preservation of financial records for the wedding liquidity fund and directs the institution to freeze further transfers pending resolution. Parties are ordered to confer on discovery related to the forensic review of Callahan and Company. We will set a schedule. The gavel did not echo. It simply ended the sentence. The clerk called the next matter, and we were released into the winter light of the hallway. Hannah stood and approached Dana first. Statement for the record. Dana kept her hands on the file. My client acted within her rights as signatory and investor. We seek compliance and restitution. We will not litigate in the press. Hannah nodded and then turned to me with a reporter's careful courtesy. Do you wish to say anything? Only that paperwork is personal when people try to move your name without asking. I said. Her mouth tilted in a way that said she had her line. In the elevator, Grant stood at the back and stared at the floor indicator. Kelsey kept her eyes on her hands. Eleanor watched me in the mirrored wall as if looking directly might make something too real. At the lobby doors, the family drifted toward the hotel like a current seeking a familiar shore. I stepped into the cold. Snow had begun with the restraint of someone entering a room late. Flakes landed on the sleeve of my coat and vanished on contact. Dana came beside me. "You did well," she said. "You did what you always do," I said. "You built a bridge and walked me over it." We reached the curb. A car pulled up and paused. The rear window rolled down and Grant leaned toward the opening. His face had lost the surface anger and found the softer thing that comes after it. "Ava, can we talk somewhere private? We just did." "I mean, without counsel. We can fix this. I can fix this. I will transfer the funds back. We can make a statement together. It does not have to be like this. If you wanted privacy, you should not have turned promises into paperwork." He flinched like the sentence had weight. "I never meant to replace you. I got scared." "My mother. The expectations. I thought if Kelsey handled the optics, you would be happier." "You did not get scared," I said. "You got convenient." He looked past me at the light changing on the street. Snow ticked against the car door. "I am sorry." "I know." He waited as if sorry might multiply if left in the air. It did not. He nodded once and the window slid up. The car moved away with the meekness expensive cars adopt near courthouses. Dana touched my arm. "Coffee and a next step," she said. We walked toward a place that would be warm and loud enough to make strategy feel human. Behind us, Hannah spoke into her phone. "The CEO bride who sued back. Court issues preservation order. Fund frozen. Audit widens, developing." I did not turn around. The sentence was not for me. It was for the people who prefer their lessons in headlines. Inside the cafe, the windows fogged themselves into privacy. Dana opened the folder and pointed to boxes that would need checking and to letters that would need sending. We spoke in the grammar of process. She would notice the bank. She would tender the preservation letters. We would prepare a motion on restitution. We would take depositions if needed. We would not hurry. When the cups were empty, we walked back into the street. The snow had decided what it wanted and fell with the confidence of a choice. We stopped at the courthouse steps so Dana could take a call from her office. I stood there with the leather folder pressed to my palm and looked up at the gray sky and felt the clean line of a day that did not wobble. I did not need vows in a church. I had a judgment in my hand. If this story touched you, please subscribe and let someone out there feel less alone. Thank you, Chapter 5. The ending, I wrote. 6 months later, the air in Seattle smelled like rain and new beginnings. The city had a way of resetting itself every few hours, and I liked the idea that the sky could start over whenever it wanted. My office sat on the 4th floor of a brick building that used to be a print shop. The sign outside read Langford Crisis Management. The letters were clean, and the light behind them glowed soft at night. Inside the walls were white, the furniture minimal, and the shelves lined with files that carried names of women who had decided that proof was a better language than anger. On opening morning, the lobby filled with a quiet hum of voices. Dana was there, her hair pulled back and her smile tired in the way of people who have built something from paperwork and willpower. Clients and friends arrived in turns. A florist from down the street dropped off coffee. A courier brought a single bouquet of lilies with a small card that read, "Congratulations from Julia Grant and the Beacon Grand staff." I set the flowers near the window where the light could move through them. Around noon, my phone buzzed with a notification. Hannah Lee had published a feature on the Chronicle's digital front page. The headline read, "Women Who Turn Betrayal into Power." I clicked it and saw my name in the second paragraph. She wrote that my case had inspired a surge of inquiries from women reviewing joint accounts and partnership documents before signing anything. She described Langford Crisis Management as a quiet firm with a loud purpose. The photo showed me standing at the courthouse steps in the snow, the folder in my hands, the sky behind me clear of everything but light. I read the article twice, not out of vanity, but to hear how the story sounded in someone else's mouth. It sounded finished. In the months after the judgment, the world rearranged itself without asking my permission. Grant sold his shares in Callahan and Company and moved to Colorado, where people still whispered his last name, but not as often. Eleanor resigned from the board citing health reasons, though the papers said she was helping the family manage a pending tax investigation. Kelsey disappeared from social media after the agency she worked with removed her profile. Industry sites mentioned a contract termination and used the phrase reputation risk. No one used my name. They did not need to. I kept mine busy. Each new client reminded me how familiar betrayal can sound and how different recovery can look. Some women wanted restitution. Others just wanted to close the file. We built both paths. The first check I received from a client who won her case went into a scholarship fund under the name Proof. It paid for a workshop on financial literacy for women leaving engagements or marriages. It felt like planting something where something else had burned. In May, Dana called from Chicago. There was a legal symposium on partnership law, and she wanted me to speak about consent in contracts. I told her I would come if she promised not to make it sound like a victory lap. She laughed and said it would just be a toast among survivors. I booked the flight. The ballroom in Chicago was full of people who carried themselves like they had wrestled the system and learned its language. I saw Dana across the room holding 2 glasses of champagne. She handed me one and raised hers. "No wedding," she said. "Only contracts," I said. "And evidence." We touched glasses and the sound was small but satisfying. The conversation around us turned to case law and policy drafts. I let it wash over me. The room smelled like paper and perfume, and the subtle electricity of people who have reclaimed something. Later, when I walked back to my hotel, the city lights blurred against the river like handwriting in motion. I thought about how many times I had replayed the old story and how this version no longer hurt. The next morning, before my flight home, I opened my email. There was a message from an unknown sender with no subject line and no text, only an attachment. I hesitated and then downloaded it. It was a photo of a wedding invitation, cream cardstock with gold edging. The names Grant Whitaker and Kelsey Hart printed in looping script. Across it, stamped in red ink, one word: void. I stared at it for a long moment. There was no malice in the feeling that followed, only an odd stillness like a door closing on its own because it finally fits the frame. When I returned to Seattle, I printed the image and placed it in a simple frame. I set it on the shelf beside my business license. The contrast amused me. On one side, a dream that collapsed under its own false weight. On the other, a document that built something real. I looked at both and thought about how thin the line is between ruin and design. That evening, the office was quiet. The city outside was rinsed clean by another round of rain. I made tea, turned off the overhead lights, and sat at my desk with the notebook I had started the night they tried to replace me. The first line still read, "The night they tried to replace me at my own rehearsal." I decided to stop playing a part and start reading the contract. I turned to a fresh page and wrote another line. The day they tried to erase me, I chose to edit instead. I closed the notebook and leaned back. The building across the street turned its lights on one by one. Somewhere, a street musician played a trumpet that caught the sound of water in its echo. I thought about all the women I would meet in the years ahead, and how some of them would still believe that silence keeps the peace. I hoped they would learn sooner than I did that silence only keeps you from hearing the warning. My phone buzzed again, a message from Julia. She had seen the Chronicle piece and wanted to say how proud she was to have witnessed the beginning of it all. She wrote that the ballroom at the Beacon Grand now hosts conferences for women-owned businesses. I smiled and typed back that sometimes a place learns from what happened inside it. Outside, the streetlight flickered against the rain. I watched it a moment longer and then shut down my computer. Tomorrow would be busy, and for once that was a comfort. Work has a way of keeping you honest. You cannot fake purpose when it has your name on the paperwork. Before leaving, I walked to the window and looked at the reflection of the office behind me. The flowers from Julia had opened fully. The lilies leaned toward the glass as if listening. I picked up the frame with the invitation and set it next to the notebook on my desk. Together, they looked like evidence of 2 versions of me. Both true, but only one current. I locked the door and stepped into the hallway. The elevator hummed softly as it carried me down. When the doors opened to the street, the rain had slowed to a mist that clung to everything and made the air smell like metal and earth. I stood there for a moment, letting it touch my face. They thought they erased my name from a wedding. But every line I wrote, every signature I kept, became the ink of an ending they could not rewrite. Revenge is not loud, it is legal. And sometimes it is just living well enough to sign your own beginning.